Today I'm going to be giving you a tour of my new Corel Painter 2020 workspace. This workspace includes all of the customization and brushes that I've added to Corel Painter. You can download my workspace and my individual brushes. There's a link to those in the description of this video. If you need help installing the workspace, check out the help guide or the help videos. Once you've imported the new workspace, everything's going to come in a little bit condensed like this. And I do this because I don't know how big your screen is going to be compared to mine, so I just want to make sure that you can see everything on screen. So you can go ahead and spread this stuff out a bit depending on how big your screen is. I'm going to move color and layers over here. I want to make sure that I don't dock it. And then there were these little panels that were next to it here. I want to go ahead and drag this one over next to color and this one over next to color set libraries. And I'll explain what these are going to do in a bit. These are sort of optional, and if you don't like them, then I'll show you how you can get rid of them. We'll move the navigator up here. If you see that red bar, it won't let you dock it, but if you kind of drag it up beyond it and then put it back down, it'll let you drop it there. And then everything else can stay where it's at. Now feel free to customize this workspace as you see fit and then save a copy. You don't have to keep all these panels open and you don't have to arrange them in the exact same way that I do. But if you do keep things consistent, it might make it easier to follow along with my tutorials. If you wanted to close a panel, you could click on the white dot to close it. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of hide it or collapse it by double-clicking on the name of the panel, so I'll do that on the navigator to hide that. We don't need to see that panel right now. Just as well, there are palette drawers that I can double-click on. If I double-click on the bar, then I can show and hide the contents of that drawer. And within that drawer is a grouping of panels that I could also collapse down and expand. Should you ever lose a panel or mess up your workspace, or if something goes wrong and you need to reset everything, you can always go back to the window menu, and you can go to Layout, and you can load the small or large monitor layout, and that will just reset everything. So I'm going to go ahead and just hide this panel, and let's go ahead and go through the individual elements of this workspace. So not much has really changed in terms of brushes. No new brush technology was added to Corel Painter 2020, so all I've really done is updated the brushes in my workspace to take advantage of GPU where applicable. To demonstrate that, I've added the new performance panel here to make it accessible in my workspace, and if I select a brush, let's say in the rendering category here, if there's more than one row of brushes, you'll notice that some of the brushes get cut off. Just kind of hover over the bottom edge here. You'll have to grab kind of in between the brushes there and just drag it down to see all the brushes. I'm going to select Digital Airbrush. This is a stamp type brush, and stamp type brushes can take advantage of GPU. So any of my brushes that can use GPU will now use GPU, and they'll be much faster if your computer has a good GPU or video card. Now, as far as my own custom brushes that I create, I'm adding brushes to this workspace every month. So depending on how old this video is at the time of you watching it, things might look a little bit different in regards to the brush icons here. So this performance panel is here in my workspace so that I have quick and easy access to enable GPU should I create any new brushes that can use GPU. It can also be a helpful learning aid for you to see which brushes can support which optimizations. And then of course you have quick access to the brush accelerator, which you'll want to run, because this is going to optimize Corel Painter to run its best on your computer. So that's really all there is to say about new brushes in my workspace. Now let's move on to take a look at how brush selection has changed in my workspace compared to Corel Painter 2019. You'll notice there's a new custom panel up here for brushes and media. And then beneath that, we have this brushes AR palette drawer, which contains all of my custom brushes and icons, as well as a stroke preview and a performance panel. We already know why performance is here, so let's click on stroke preview. Stroke preview is here because the stroke previews have been much improved in Corel Painter 2020, so you can get a pretty good idea of what that brush is going to look like by looking at the stroke preview. However, I prefer these custom icons that I've created here, so I don't want to see a big run-on list of stroke previews. I just want to be able to see these quick icons, and then if I click on one of them, then I can see what the stroke preview will look like for that particular brush. And most of the time when I'm selecting brushes, this is how I'm going to be doing it. However, I've included options in my workspace this time around. So up in the Brushes and Media custom panel, we have a button for Stroke Preview. And if I turn that on and off, that's basically just going to hide that palette drawer. And it's going to show and hide my default brush selection process. If I turn that off and I turn on the next option, which is Panel Compact, then it's going to open the new Compact Brush Selector. I'm probably not going to use this very much, but I've added it here as an option for you if you prefer selecting brushes this way. If we go ahead and hide that and we show the next option, Panel Full View, that's going to show the Full View Brush Selector. Now I do use this sometimes, especially if I'm creating custom brushes or I'm managing these different icons or just going through different brushes to test them out. it's nice to have this big brush selector on screen. So now I can really easily choose my brush selection method. I can have these icons here, I can have a list with a stroke preview, or I can access everything at once using the brush selector. I'll go ahead and just bring up my default stroke preview. Now the next 4 icons are for media, and these open commonly used media panels. For example, if I open gradient, my gradient panel is going to open, and I could actually take that and move it really wherever I want. I could have it on the right, or I could have it on the left. It's up to you. I would probably put it over on the right. And then now you can always pop it open there using this button. Now I use gradients often enough to where I'd rather just have the panel open here. I've also included the general panel because there are some options for certain brushes that use gradients. For example, if I select cylinder pen, I'm going to paint a test stroke with that, and you can see that I'm getting this gradient here. But I could change the source from gradient repeat to regular gradient, and now I get a different type of gradient. I'm going to go ahead and change it back to gradient repeat. And if I also play with the direction, I can get lots of different effects for this particular brush. So because of that workflow, that's why I have everything grouped together here with gradients. If you use gradients in a different way, feel free to break up this panel. If you find that you use the shortcut for the general panel and it keeps popping open gradients, feel free to just take the general panel out if you like, and you can have it be separate. So that's gradients. I'll close that. Now we'll look at patterns. I'll put patterns over here on the right. And again, I can just pop this out if I want to be working with patterns. I can pop out textures if I want to be working with textures. And I can pop open looks if I want to be working with looks. And again, once I put those over on the right, they'll stay over there. If you want to make sure that all your panels stay put, you can save your layout, and of course you can export your workspace. So that's the brushes and media custom panel. Now if we look at all my brushes down here, you can see I have quite a few categories of brushes. Some of them you'll have to expand to be able to see all the brushes. I'm just double clicking on the tab, but you can kind of tidy things up here and just have the brushes that you're using accessible. I usually don't have too many of these tabs open at once. But again, if you don't like that brush selection process and you prefer to have it this way, then you can change between your different categories and then select the brushes from this list. You can also resize the custom brush selector if you like, and you can have more brushes showing all at once, or you can make it wide like this. Now the brush selection process does kind of extend a bit. I have these particle brushes and image hose nozzles here. These tend to be specialty brushes that I don't always use, so they're in their own palette drawers. I can double click on the drawer to expand it, and if I want to work with image hose nozzles, then I have my image hose nozzle brushes, and what comes out of the brushes are the image hose nozzles. So for example, if I wanted to paint with these branches, I'll click on that nozzle to load it. It suggests I use linear size P angle D. So I'll go ahead and select that brush. And then if I paint with it, then I'm going to get this really nice tree branch. If I select boulders, it suggests I use linear size P, so I'll select that. And now I can draw my boulders like so. If I'm done working with image hose nozzles, I can close it up. If I want to work with particle brushes, I can open that up and I have all of my different categories of particle brushes. You can expand these a bit too to see more brushes. And then beneath that, I've also grouped in particles common, as well as the other particles panels. This is because when you're working with particle brushes, you can get a lot of different looks and behaviors by tweaking these different properties. But this is entirely optional. If you don't use this, you can just hide it or close it or really do whatever you want. I'll select a particle brush here, let's say plant brush. This particular brush uses my main and additional colors. I'll select a light green and a dark green. Then if I paint a stroke, you can see it has multiple colors in it. When I'm done with the particle brushes, I can close up that palette drawer. Now, as you're selecting brushes and painting with them, they're going to get added to your recent brushes list, so I have that up here at the top. This is a really handy way to get to your most recent brushes. You also have a button to toggle to your last used brush. I've set this up as a custom keyboard shortcut of tilde, but you could really set it to whatever you like. You'll notice up in the top in the properties bar, there are now labels that group together some of the various properties. Now you have the option of turning this on or off. I'm going to go ahead and just leave it on, even though I already know what all of this stuff is. I think it could be really helpful for people who are trying to follow along with my tutorials. Beneath the properties bar, I have my shortcuts and my brush manager. These are custom palettes I created with some various shortcuts that I use on a regular basis. I have new, save, save as, cut, copy, and paste. I have fill if I want to fill my canvas or a selection. If I want to free transform, I have a button for that. Usually I'll use a custom keyboard shortcut, but sometimes it's easier for you to follow along if I click on a button, so I have that up here. We can resize the file. I can align layers on their horizontal and vertical centers, can flip the canvas horizontally and vertically, turn on and off mirror painting, and then we can toggle on perspective guides. I have a custom keyboard shortcut for that, which is P. If I hit P on my keyboard, then it toggles through the different modes. And if I draw, then my lines are going to be constrained into perspective. The next option here is toggle perspective guided strokes. If I click that, then I can draw freeform. And if I wanted to turn it back on, I'd go to my stroke options here, and then I'd turn on align to guides. Now if I hit P on my keyboard to show my guides, I could also go back to stroke options, and I could choose the perspective guides tool. If we look up in the properties, we can see align to guides has a checkbox here. I have another custom keyboard shortcut of Shift P, which will toggle that on and off. So as I'm drawing, if I want to be locked into perspective and then switch, I can hit Shift P, draw freeform, hit Shift P again, and lock back into perspective. Again, that's a custom keyboard shortcut that I've added to my workspace. And then the remaining shortcuts are zoom to fit and zoom to 100%, which control the zoom of your canvas. If we click on the Brush Manager tab, these are some helpful shortcuts for managing brushes in your workspace. For example, if you wanted to save a variant of a brush that you've tweaked, you could click on Save Variant. If you wanted to remove a variant, you could remove it. You could also export and import brushes. You could restore all default variants. That restores all of the brushes to their default variants. Then you could also export and import your workspace. You can open the Custom Palette Organizer to manage box files. You can add commands to custom palettes, and you can save layouts. Up here in the top, I have the navigator. I can pop that open and I can see a small image of what I'm working on. I'm not going to go into vast detail about the navigator, but it's there if you want to use it. If not, you can just close that and get rid of it. And now we'll move over to the right side to this big grouping of color and layers. This is a custom palette drawer that I can show and hide. And then there are these two little tabs that I've added with some shortcuts on them that we'll look at in just a minute. At the top, we have our color wheel. I've gone ahead and customized this a bit to make it pretty minimal. I don't use cloning, so I've gone ahead and just removed the cloning button, but if you wanted to get any of those buttons back, you can get those from the menu here. And then I have my color sliders in this little panel down here. That panel can be found under Color Panel Compact. And this is kind of the way that I've been working with color in previous versions of Corel Painter. What's nice in this version is that there's color in the sliders now, which really makes the sliders a lot more useful. And then there are a few other little panels tucked in here, which we'll come back to in just a minute. But I just want to skip on down to layers, which is something that I use a lot when I'm painting as well. So I could have all my different layers of paint here. And then beneath that, I have layer shortcuts. These are common shortcuts that deal with layers and other kinds of layer-related things. You can hover over these shortcuts to see what they are, but I'm not going to go into vast detail about how to use these. They'll be mentioned in my courses and my tutorials where they're applicable. One thing you'll notice that is a bit different is the arrangement. I've tried to kind of keep these grouped together, so there are some breaks here. For example, group layers and ungroup layers kind of goes together, but those don't go together with, let's say, clone layer, clear layer, and float. And then another example is select all, clear and deselect, and select none, or you could select all and you could clear, or you could select all and you could float. So shortcuts that you might use together in a workflow are all kind of next to each other. Now we'll take a look at some of the panels that are tucked in here. There's color variability if you wanted to vary your color automatically. There's color expression, which will bounce between your main and additional color, and you can set that to an expression. We have stroke attributes and underpainting, which you can use to add effects to layers. For example, I could change the hue of this layer very quickly just by using these sliders. That's a lot faster than going up into the menu and adding an effect. Then beneath that, there's color set libraries. By default, you're just going to see a blank library here. This is blank for a reason, which I'll come back to. But basically, this is a place where you can add little paint wells or color swatches to paint with. I have some added here as an example. These are swatches for a particular painting that I was working on. And beneath that, we have harmonies. I'll double click on that. Harmonies is a new feature in Corel Painter 2020, and it shows you some color harmonies. This gives you color inspiration, and it can just be a handy tool for picking different values of color. For example, I'll select this messy dab brush here. I'll paint with this olive color, and I can get lighter versions of that color very easily like so. Now the harmony that I'm using can be changed in this top right sub-dialog menu. Right now I'm showing monochromatic light and monochromatic dark. I have a tutorial you can watch on how this feature works, So I'm not going to go into detail about all these different modes, but the two that I find the most helpful for my workspace are light and dark, because I get those values. If you wanted to toggle on some of the other modes, you could of course do that. You could turn on analogous, and now you have your various colors that are analogous to each other. And then next to layers, we have layout grid. This puts up a layout grid, which is helpful for composition, and divine proportion, which is also a composition tool. Now, the one thing in the color and layers palette drawer that we haven't looked at yet is the mixer, and that's because I've customized this so much that it's really an alternative way of working with color. So what you would want to do is you'd want to double click to open the mixer, but then you'd probably want to just go ahead and close color for this particular painting technique. I want to make the mixer bigger so that I can see all of this shape here. Now I'm seeing a gamut mask. That's this triangular shaped thing here. And without going into too much detail about what color gamut masking is, I'll just really quickly try to describe how you would use this new color selection process. So by default, you wouldn't be seeing this triangle. You would be seeing this. This is the same color wheel as you're seeing here as far as where the hues are located. But what you'll notice is the color starts out very vibrant and saturated, then it starts to get desaturated as it moves toward the center. So if you prefer, you could certainly choose colors just using this wheel, or if you want to use color gamut masking, then you can create a gamut mask and then load it here. Now I have a video you can watch on how to use this tool that goes into more detail, so I'm just going to kind of briefly show you what it does. What I would want to do is I'd want to go to File, and then Open Template. There are all of Corel Painter's default templates here, but then beneath that, I have some brush icon templates if you wanted to create your own brush icons to put in the workspace. And then there are some real art templates. These are canvases that have pre-applied tone and canvas texture. So there's some standard canvas sizes here, including a new 18 by 24 at 150 to take advantage of the performance enhancements here in Corel Painter. And beneath that, we have a dab template for creating dabs. There's gamut masking, which I'm going to come back to. And then there are a couple of pencil templates that have paper texture and a watercolor template that has a watercolor texture. So what I want to open up is gamut masking. I can create a gamut mask. For example, this complementary mask. I could transform the mask to choose a different set of colors. Then I can save this. I could save it as a Painter RIF file, a Photoshop PSD, a PNG, or a JPEG. To keep the file size smaller, I'm going to choose PNG. But if you were going to want to reuse or edit this, then you would want to save as a layered format. I'll go ahead and just save it as test PNG. Now here in the mixer, I can load in that color gamut mask. I could do that using the top right subdialog menu to open a mixer pad, but a faster way to do it is to use one of these shortcuts here, Open Mixer Pad. Now it's just easier to click on this bigger button than it is to go to this menu and then try to find Open Mixer Pad. That just takes way too long, so this button makes it easier. Click on Open Mixer Pad, and I'll select that Test PNG gamut mask. I'll need to click on the magnifier icon here in the bottom of the mixer panel, hold down Control, and then zoom out a little bit so I can see the whole gamut. And now if I click on Sample Color, I can sample colors to paint with. I'll just create a new painting here. Put down some of this green. I can sample this purple and put that in. And even get one of these desaturated blues over here. And all of these colors are going to work really nicely together in this painting. Now again, I recommend that you watch my tutorial about gamut masking and how to use this tool if you're interested in learning more. Now if I wanted to save these colors as swatches, I can do that. I could click this button here that says New Color Set from Mixer Pad, and that will analyze the mixer pad and take some colors out of it. If you were going to do that though, then you would want to go back to your gamut mask tool. You would want to go to the mask, and then you'd want to completely cover the background so you don't accidentally select any of those other colors. Once you do that, then you could click this button to create a new color set from the mixer pad. You could choose how many colors you want to create. And down here in the new color set, you can see I have a bunch of these different purples and greens, which were taken from this color gamut. This doesn't do the best job of selecting colors though, so what I would recommend is selecting colors manually. If I want to delete a color set, I have this button here to remove color set. I'll remove that color set, and I'll even remove this other one as well. So now I just have my blank Painter Colors library. Now I can sample a color here from my color gamut in the mixer, and I can add it using the plus button. I can sample this purple color, add that, sample this color, add that, this color, add that, maybe one of these blues. And this can be a starting point for my colors. Then if I wanted to, I could choose different values here using harmonies. I could add that color. I could make a darker version of it. And if I wanted to, I could even just lock these harmonies. That way I can get these different tones without having to worry about messing up my base color here. Lock and unlock to get these different colors here. Then I have another button here called Sort HLS. If I click on that, that's going to sort my colors by hue, lightness, and then saturation. That can be helpful to kind of group the colors together. And then if you just wanted to clear out this whole library, you can click on Restore Set, Restore Painter Colors. That's basically just going to clear out all of the color swatches so you can start anew. And of course, you can import and export color swatches using these buttons down here in the bottom of color set libraries. Then you could save those colors along with your painting. Another thing you might notice in the mixer panel is the mixer colors up here at the top. I have my value scale that goes from white to black with a lot of gray values in between. This can be helpful. Next to that, I have some almost gray values for the different hues. I have an almost gray yellow, which I can put down, almost gray blue, an almost gray rose color, and so on. And that's because when you're trying to select these colors here from your gamut mask, these little slices are very small, so it's just easier to get to those up here. You could, of course, zoom in using the magnifier too if you wanted to. If you want to reset your mixer, just click in the top right subdialog, and you can restore HSL, and then that's been reset. I'm going to go ahead and hide the mixer and go back to the color. And any panels that I don't want to be using at the time, I can just collapse down to make more room on my screen. Now the last couple panels we'll look at are back over on the left side. This is for papers and flow maps. Papers and flow maps control the different kinds of texture that you're going to get when you're working in Corel Painter. I'm going to choose a brush that can take advantage of papers, such as the chalk brush. Right now, if I paint with this brush, I get this particular paper texture, but I could change that here in this panel. I could select Fine Dots. Now I get a dotted texture. Now in Corel Painter 2020, there's this new Papers selector, and I could use this instead of using this Papers panel. It really depends on how you're working and how often you need to access these controls. But as you can see, I can access my grain properties, I can access my paper properties, I can see a preview of my paper, and I can access the libraries. So if this is enough for you, then you don't need the Papers panel to be open. I'm going to select a watercolor brush now, called Noisy Flow Map Fringe. This brush uses the flow map, so I can access the flow maps panel here. But just as well, up in the properties bar, there is a flow maps panel that has access to all of those controls. So again, depending on how much you need to access this stuff, it might be easier just to go to it up here, rather than have this panel open on screen. So if I paint a test stroke here, then you can see the edges of the brush stroke kind of flow into this flow map texture. If I change this to a dotted pattern and do a stroke, then you can see it's a little bit different. And because you can combine the paper texture with the flow map, there's a little bit of that dotted paper texture. If I were to change that to something else, then the brush stroke would look a little bit different. So there you go. That's a demonstration of how to use my custom workspace for Corel Painter 2020. If you're interested in learning how to use this workspace to create digital art, check out my Corel Painter tutorials and courses. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.